Good evening, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Shadow Twin by Dale Hoover. Now, Shadow Twin was a book that was a part of a horror line put out by Dell Publishing in the 90s. And this horror line was called Abyss. And the mission statement of this particular imprint was to essentially, get to the psychological root of horror. There was definitely elements of the supernatural, but at the same time, a lot of the horror tended to come from, one's id or, subconscious. And this is actually the first book that was a part of this, horror line that I've read. And if it's anything to go by, Abyss must have been a really good horror imprint. Because Shadow Twin, it's a really good horror novel. And there's definitely some supernatural stuff going on, but at the same time, the real horror is in, how the protagonist is affected by what's going on, as well as his family. And that definitely made things stand out in a far more immediate sense of danger. So the story of Shadow Twin, it's about this guy named Jack, his wife Rachel, and their son Jed. They moved into this town and kind of a suburb area, and they've been there for a while now. And they've settled in, and on overall life seems to be going okay. But one day, they find something rather strange in the attic, namely a hole, and it's a kind of a small hole. It's small enough to lose a couple of golf balls in or something like that. But the thing is, this hole doesn't seem to go anywhere. Like stuff goes in, but there doesn't seem to be any bottom. And they've tried, going downstairs, going to where, okay, surely this hole leads into the, room right below us. Well, they go down there and they look up on the ceiling. There's no hole. So, okay, this is more than a little strange. Because it's not like, they reach into a hole and, they reach hard floor. It's like there's nothing there. So, when this happens, they bring in some scientists. One of them's even a parapsychologist, I believe is a term. One of them studies psychology. One of them studies the supernatural. But they get involved just to see if they can figure out what's going on here. And what ends up happening is Jack gradually begins to lose control of himself. He's always been a guy who's valued control. I mean, he's prided himself on having a good sense of, he's always been able to, maintain a grip on his life. And, that's one of the reasons why, he and his wife and his son, they've been able to, prop up the, picture perfect, marriage slash, familial relationship in the suburbs. But at the same time, though, there's always been kind of a darkness there that doesn't get to come out very much. And they're usually able to brush it to the side. But anytime Jack's in a position where, he's not in control of something, there's something that's always at the back of his head. And that's just, arguing with him. And he just he's always able to keep it bowed down, back in the corner. Um, but once this hole, comes into play, that part of him starts to come out even more. He starts being abusive towards his son, traumatizing the poor boy, and and his wife, she's a victim of this too, because one, she sees this abusive nature coming out of him, but then he also seems to be tearing himself apart, psychologically, because there'll be moments where he's fierce and abusive, but then there'll be moments where he will be almost like as sick as a dog, because of all this stress and all the stuff that's been bottled up inside of him, and it's just now coming out. And he things take an even darker turn when something comes out of the hole. Namely, sort of this humanoid creature. It's almost I was about to say abomination, but sort of malformed creature, humanoid, that comes out to of the hole. And it turns out this hole, it's gotten bigger over time, and the way it's gotten bigger is, it seems like all the stress and all the turmoil that Jack has seems to be feeding it, and things get even worse when their son Jed, begins to having dreams about he has these nightmares about someone called the Dream Man, who keeps saying he's going to take his daddy away. And that's kind of what ties into this creature coming out of the hole in the floor in the attic. And Jack starts having these nightmares too, not about the Dream Man like his son's having, but about going up to the attic at night and looking down the hole and seeing this bizarre amalgamation of teeth and oily tongues, sort of just reaching up to him, calling him down. And it's some really spooky stuff. And then he actually starts going up there, almost against his will on a regular basis. And he makes a point to make sure that, his wife, is either asleep or gone, but, he'll go up there and just stare at it. And all this baggage that he's kept locked up just kind of comes out, and the hole keeps getting bigger. And then something really horrible happens, in which a life is lost, and once something living ends up going into the hole, that hole it doesn't grow bigger. It actually kind of shrinks, and Jack kind of realizes that he needs to feed the hole, and so he starts bringing animals to the hole, and eventually it works its way up to people. And yeah, it's a pretty horrific situation to be, for anyone to be in, I would imagine. And so this hole, it's almost like a drug in a way, because he has to feed it in order for it to shrink, and it always gets to where it's almost gone, but never quite enough, and it just keeps calling to him. And so he's getting more stressed out, and his wife and son are getting more threatened by him. And the scientists, the ones that were called in initially, they're trying to figure out what's going on, because they see that this family is clearly in danger, but something isn't letting them leave the house. The son doesn't want to leave. The Jack can't leave. Like, he gets physically ill at the prospect of leaving, even though he's already being eaten away because of all this. And, and his wife, she's kind of latching onto him because, he's sort of, the figurehead of the household. And, she can't really get up the inner strength to, because her rock, her husband, is being eaten from within, more or less. And she's kind of going crazy too. And so these scientists are trying to help. And, it's just a matter of time, before things get worse. And the dream man, the creature from the hole, keeps wanting to be fed. And yeah, this was a really this book stood out to me. If I had to describe it to someone, I would say, okay, if you ever seen the horror movie House, it was a horror movie from the 80s. It had William Catt in it. I mean, it was an okay movie. But imagine something like that, but instead of the whole comedic horror that they went with, imagine the disturbing horror of Hellraiser being put into that movie. So basically, the whole idea is someone being haunted by inner guilt, and monsters are manifesting, things like that. But then and these monsters want to be fed, whether it be blood or just life, in one's inner life in general. That's kind of that's how I would describe it. A far more horrific version of House. And I apologize if anyone hadn't seen either of those movies, but for those who are into the horror genre, you might have an idea of what I'm talking about. But yeah, so this book, it really made an impression on me because, for the most part, you're in a lot of it's kind of a first person narrative. You're seeing a lot of it from Jack's perspective. And so you see this guy who, I mean, like anyone else, he's got his demons, but he usually keeps a good handle on it. But then when all this supernatural stuff starts happening, you see all these inner thoughts he has, the chaos. It just pounds away, in the recesses of his head, and it just tears itself out of him to where he just lets it out into the world, and in this case the world being his home. And so it's pretty horrifying because everyone has dark thoughts. Everyone has stuff that they worry about, that they stress out about every day in, day out. Sometimes it's work related, sometimes it's family related, but a lot of people are able to just keep control of it. But at the same time, you just know that there's this darkness that's there, and I guess it just depends on the person, whether that darkness if that darkness gets out enough to where it threatens those around them, or the person that darkness is a part of becomes a threat to those around them. But reading Shadow Twin, though, Dale Hoover, this was the first book that she wrote, unless I'm mistaken, and she really did an excellent job of getting inside the head of a character who's gradually losing control of his life due to circumstances that are, for the most part, outside of his control. And you see all it's like you get all the uncertainty that's in this guy's head, and also you see how his family is affected by all this, and you really feel for them because I mean they're innocents. I mean, you know, they both. I mean, they obviously love him, but they're becoming terrified of him, and they don't know what to do. And these scientists, I mean, they have ideas, but it's not really until the end that something concrete emerges. And so, I mean, these guys, they try and stick it with the family because they know that they're in danger, but at the same time, they're almost at a loss, just as much of a loss as, this family is. And I mean, and these guys are the professionals. And, to be honest, they hadn't seen anything like this. I mean, they've seen some paranormal activity before, but nothing quite like this hole, and probably nothing quite like the Dream Man. And so, but yeah, this was a good book. I would say that if you like good psychological horror, Shadow Twin, is a good book to go with because I mean, you really get into the unraveling of this human being here, throughout the whole book, and it's very unsettling. And there were some moments where I thought there were moments where I thought, okay, come on, Jack, get it together, buck up and be a man, or be when are you going to become the hero and fight back against all this? But the thing is, I realized that Dale Hoover was making a choice to write Jack almost like a drug addict, and that's kind of what this whole was for him. It was like a drug that was killing him, and so the fact that he wasn't able to just fight back against it, I mean, that actually made some sense. If you look at it from the perspective of, it's like a kind of like a drug analogy or something like that, like a mental drug. And, if you look at it that way, the horror becomes a lot more relatable. Because, the character, Jack, I mean, he wants to fight back against this thing, but he's not letting himself, because in a lot of ways it's giving him freedom that he ordinarily doesn't have, and yet he's horrified to this freedom because he values control. And I talked with someone recently about drug addiction, and reading this book made me think of that. I mean, just the whole process of being addicted to drugs. And what's going on here isn't quite the same thing, obviously, but it made me, I guess, appreciate what the character was going through, in the sense that he couldn't just turn it off and okay, solve the problem, no big deal. I mean, this was a very big deal, and it goes on for a rather long time. So anyway, though, and also the human interest in this novel, I really appreciated, because, when if you watch a horror movie, or if you read a horror story, the best kind of horror, is arguably when, something is happening to the characters, or two characters that you come to care about. Whereas if they were characters that had no substance to them, it'd almost be as if, okay, I mean, there's some freaky stuff going on here, and yeah, some of it's cool, or but at the same time, you don't really feel anything in here, or in your head you're not concerned for the character's well-being. But Shadow Twin does not have that problem. Shadow Twin, once you look at it from the perspective of Jack being almost like a paranormal drug addict, then things kind of fall into place. And I mean, you're already concerned for the safety of his family, or at least I was. but just looking at it from that perspective, everything just feels a lot more urgent and real. And even, the scientists that were involved, even they come across as very well-rounded characters, and in the sense that they're professionals in their respective fields, but they are out of their depth. But even though they're up against something that they have little to no idea how to contend with, at the same time, you see how decent of human beings that they are, because they're not going to just leave this family to face this threat alone. And so yeah, this was I really like that about this book. I like that about any genre in general, where you care about the characters and what's happening to them. So when the horror was happening, I was metaphorically on the edge of my seat, because I cared about the characters, and the stuff that was happening was horrifying. Whether it be, Jack letting his dark impulses out and lashing out at those around him, or whether it be Jed innocently telling his mom and dad about the dream man talking to him, or Jack just staring at the hole and then eventually talking to the creature or to the thing from the hole. That part right there, when Jack first interacts with this thing, like in its corporeal form, in the attic, that right there was probably one of the spookiest bits I've read in a horror novel in quite some time. So I also liked how, there is an explanation for this, but getting to that explanation, it's not a predictable trip. It's really not. It's one of those things where it's just you find out about the nature of the threat, but that doesn't make it any less of a threat or any less horrifying. It's just, it goes from there's something that's trying to destroy me, something trying to take me over, and I don't know what it is, to I have some idea of what's trying to take me over now, but at least I know what it is, but it's still trying to take me over, and I still can't stop it, So it doesn't really help the characters in the sense that it doesn't make things easier for them, but at the very least, they have an idea of, maybe there's a chance, but even then, though, the chance is slim. And so, this wasn't just an easy peasy, disc one boss fight by any means. And it just, it was pretty unrelenting as far as what this family goes through, and as far as what this thing puts them through, and just how evil it is. And I really enjoyed this novel. I read it a couple of weeks ago, and I'd mean to do a review on it, just stuff happened, stuff got in the way, but I'd heard about the Abyss horror line that Dell had, and I'd read about it online, and a lot of the books sounded pretty interesting, and I from what I understand, not every single book was as effective as say what I read here. A lot of the books, some of the books from what I understand were pretty good, some of the others not so much, but Shadow Twin, though, it came out in 1991, and the Abyss line eventually it collapsed for one reason or another. But for the time that it was there, there were some pretty cutting edge horror novels. I mean, you go into the horror community, you ask around, and you bring up the Abyss line that Dell Publishing had, and if you get the right person, they'll kind of look back on the line with some fondness, at least in terms of what that line tried to accomplish. But yeah, so like I said, if Shadow Twin is anything to go by, then I want to read some of these other books. But no, so anyway, yeah, I think Dale Hoover, she only wrote one other book for this line. I think it was called 16 millimeter. But I heard it wasn't that good of a book, unfortunately. From what I've read about the book, it sounded like it was a lot more routine and predictable. I guess, in a manner of speaking, it was a lot safer. It was a lot safer of a horror book than Shadow Twin was. Like, it was, I guess, more accessible to the mainstream audiences. I just heard that it wasn't that good. But Shadow Twin, though, if I remember correctly, like, it was her first book, and if it is her first book, she made one heck of a debut. I haven't been able to find anything else that she wrote, and I don't know if this was just a case of the book didn't take off at the time it came out, and she maybe tried one or two more things and then just decided to call it quits. I don't know, or something went on in her personal life. I don't know. That's kind of one of the downsides of stuff like this. I mean, every now and then you'll find a book written by someone, and you find out that it was maybe one of the only books that they ever wrote, and they never went on to do anything else. But you read it and you're like, this person had some serious talent for their field. And so if you like the horror genre, and are especially interested in psychological horror, I would recommend, if you can get yourself a copy of Shadow Twin, maybe order it online or something like that. It's very much worth picking up, very much worth checking out. It's a very good read, and it kept me interested. I was invested in what was going on, and it really made me think about, I guess you could say, the darkness of everyday human nature, or at least the dark thoughts that most people have that tend to be bottled up, but then through one way or another, they manage to make themselves known in a rather horrific manner. And you look at the stuff that's going on right now, and I think you could say, a lot of that stuff's coming out on, a wide basis, with, everyday people, and you're just seeing a lot more of it now. But anyway, though, yeah, Shadow Twin, I really liked it. I definitely want to read more books from this line, from the Abyss line, and if I can find them. And I recommend it for those who are interested in the horror genre. So I will give Shadow Twin 4 out of 5 stars. And it was a good book. The only, I almost want to say 5 stars, but I have read better novels. Years ago. I've read better horror novels that are definitely worthy of 5-star of a 5-star rating. And so this one was close. But having read certain other novels that tackled some similar subject matter, especially in terms of, there being, say, a supernatural threat, but at the same time, a lot of the horror being more of a human nature-based evil, I guess. I read stuff that was kind of like the gold standard, or at least what I would consider the gold standard. And so Shadow Twin was kind of like it was a reminder of all that. And so in some ways, I felt like I'd been there before. Like, I mean, when I was describing it as, the movie House, but with the horror of Hellraiser, um, I mean, like I said, you take that description and it feels familiar. You've been there before, but at the same time, though, maybe you just hadn't been at it from that perspective, from this perspective, and so, uh, yeah, that's probably the only reason I could think of just at the moment that I'm not giving it 5 stars, but it's definitely worthy of 4 star of a 4 star rating. It's a very good book. Uh, definitely check it out, and you probably won't regret it, if you're into horror, that is. But thank you very much for taking the time to check out this review. And got any questions? Please feel free to drop me a line. Y'all have a good night.